My intervention is going to be on implementing nanotourism by on-site education. And it's about the work that we are doing at the AA Nanotourism Visiting School, which is part of Architecture Association School of Architecture in London. As I'm sure you're all very well familiar with the AA in Bedford Square in London, as it is a very forward-thinking architectural school, been like that with ups and downs for the more than past 160 years. And here the picture of where it finally got the power to award degrees for the first time recently. So to kind of position in there the visiting school, which is one part of all the regular programs that at the AA are running, visiting school is a very interesting and unusual platform for teaching. It is composed by, I think, roughly between 50 and 60, depends on each year, very diverse programs spread around on is a global kind of school approach. All of those, they are extremely different from each other because they're all kind of built on local context and different agendas from different people that are running them. So very diverse set of programs and experimentation with independent agenda. So each year we are for 2 weeks one of those dots. So we started with, of course, the question why tourism even matters. And just noting out that tourism provides 1/10 of jobs in the world, which right now were suddenly jeopardized, as we heard. It sets the industry of tourism as something that greatly impacts our everyday life, whether we are traveling or staying where we usually do spend our lives. So tourism has developed into this kind of model, which we usually call mass tourism model or over tourism. And the model is a very generic approach to visiting places that kind of repeats itself all over the world and doesn't really react to neither social or physical context whatsoever. The thinking about this, we have remembered Buckminster Fuller, who said the following: you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So with this in mind, again, we approach to a new, let's say, platform, which we are calling nanotourism. And although, as it has been already shared today, so many people are doing an alternative to the tourism as we know it, but maybe I like to think that we have given a possible name to these efforts of people all around the world. So the platform I'm sharing now with you is a school. It's a visiting school that addresses this kind of research on alternative tourism in different parts of the world. So what we do the same every time, we always run the same educative process, or let's say research and creative process. So within the project that you're going to see later as examples and case studies, we are always addressing very thoroughly the place, the user, and the material. I mean, this might be a simplistic representation of architecture, but nevertheless, you can't avoid place. The user is something which is, in a way, tool to create meaningful and operational architecture. And of course, architecture is about material. It's haptical, as Fines has showed us very well just previously. The other thing which we are running through very thoroughly, it is a process. So I like to think that actually a process is project per se. Meaning that these three stops or activities are something that are appearing in a recurrent process. So first we need to research and understand something, and then follows the design, the decision making, which it's kind of a process of designing. And a very important moment in this educational program that we are running is making, which means prototyping and learning by doing. And once you have a working prototype, you have to kind of put it back into the research mode in order to learn something out of it and to make another version of it, another set of decision making in another design. And usually there is maybe like 5 or 6 recurrences depending on the group, how this works, just as a pretext to understand the projects. So another thing which is important to stress out is that we take participatory action research, simply to try to unveil all the hidden qualities in specific spaces that we are tackling with. So the methodology of research is very clear. So in a way, we can speak about nanotourism as a school of thought, school of thinking and creating case studies that are a creative critique on traditional tourism as we know it today. So this is our website where all our projects done in the past 7 years so far are fully presented, kind of a repository of everything we've done. Let me now show you a couple of those examples of those creative critiques. Just to mention that what we're going to see are student projects, and they're very experimental, and they're developed yearly in the time frame of 3 weeks to 14 days. So please keep in mind that most of today's architectural schools are producing young architects, technocrats that are kind of used to create, well, design buildings in traditional sense of the world. But with our program, we aim to teach architecture outside of classical classrooms. We see our discipline inherently connected to society and its environment, where the process of thinking reaches beyond the mere design. Okay, so we have been up till now addressing four different locations. We stayed a couple of years in Vitanje in Slovenia, then we went to France in Ault, we went to the Pacific environment in Honolulu, and we stayed last year in Cusco, Peru, on high altitudes. So these are four different locations. For each one, I'll give you a little bit of context. And a couple of projects and examples. So starting with Vitanje, a small village in kind of idyllic environment in the middle of Slovenia, a hillside landscape with a lot of greenery, and a village traditionally kind of wrapped around a little dominating church. But the specificity of this village is that with Dekleva Gregović architects, together in collaboration with 3 other architectural studios, which was a collaboration, we have designed and built this building, which was a substitution of a previous community building where a lot of community life was going on. The community gave this opportunity or this place to kind of build another building, which is a cultural center of European space technologies, but at the same time also embeds the community programs as well. So it is a space for local community, it is a space for the exhibition on space technologies, and a space for the researchers of outer space. Why is this there? Is because of this man, Herman Potočnik Nordung, who has written a book almost 100 years ago called The Problem of Space Travel, the Rocket Motor. So you can see Herman Potočnik Nordung maybe as first architect for outer space. He designed 100 of sketches, diagrams like this, or maybe trying to propose spaces within the outer space, but also designing a concrete space stations or architectures for space, which is one of the most important, let's say, graphics or contributions from his book. That didn't really stay in the history, but it also had cultural connotations where Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke knew about his work, and based on that sketch, the whole scenery of the 2001 A Space Odyssey. So Vitanje, a small village of 800 inhabitants, Xeut as a new building attractor, bringing in quite many people per year. So it kind of created a couple of different outsets to think about. So for this presentation, I kind of experimentally threw in for every project, every student proposal, a very kind of controversial word that usually we related directly to tourism, just to kind of bring this together as a discussion. So a hotel, which also opens up the topic of addressing the infrastructures, the cultural infrastructures as being an underused facilities. So Xeut Hotel. We've looked at what are the common things between the outer space and Earth, and that obviously is human needs. One of those is sleeping. And if you look at sleeping on Earth and in space, you see that basically you're doing the same process, but in a different way. So out of this, it came up an idea of three-dimensional sleeping that obviously relates to the object that we are using to do sleeping. So asking how to approach the idea of overnight staying within the building, there were developed two prototypes, one of kind of created supports from below, which was implemented into an experience of spending the night within the exhibition, and the other version of suspending your body from above. And through this kind of experimentation, we came up with a technological solution which was able to be kind of constructed there with a little bit of engineering and creating an example of a levitation suit where a visitor could extend the exhibition into overnight stay with experiencing the three-dimensional sleeping that kind of relates to how the astronauts spend their nights. So interestingly, that kind of extension of an exhibition was then kind of shared around through the social media, and quite immediately this was very populated in architecture and design web magazines, but suddenly it also appeared to lifestyle magazines, and we or the institution started to get kind of requests of when it's possible to book such a night and when the hotel is going to be opened. So in that sense, we kind of stretched the use of existing building, but at the same time, this was at the same time, this was also a proposal of a very specific experience that also comes from a very specific context that Vitanje and the building creates. So let's try to see what does restaurant resonates. So in the building and in the environment, in the local context, we have identified the interesting set of culinary experiences. So we've looked at what does eating really mean, what is feeding in terms of nature and what is dining in terms of culture. And we teamed up together with a local chef, with a local restaurant producing traditional Slovenian dishes, and moved on to understand conceptually how a dining experience changes if you introduce the outer space properties. So in the outer space, there is no tools, so we done the pollution of dinnerware, except of retaining the napkin, which is kind of a wearable infrastructure. It's the only part of your tools that you are using in this experience of dining sale. So running through a set of experiments, it was then kind of designed a process of experience of dining with Micha coming in, well, the chef coming in and applying the mushroom soup onto your unexisting plate, just a memory of it. This is, yes, a mushroom soup with a bit of sour cream, where this was part of the final jury. The whole menu was served, where we kind of consumed a couple of courses, including Yaka here struggling with the traditional sausage. So at the same time, we also teamed up with local winery, a very high-level winery, and winemaker Sasha Topolshek, and we looked at what wine tasting really is. It's kind of a ritual, which again relates to a certain property of a certain object. Wine tasting with this kind of 8 steps, it is obvious on Earth, but as soon as you kind of remove the object and ask yourself how to substitute the object in relation to zero gravity understanding, the glass started to disappear and maybe appear in a different form. So we came up together with a proposal of red wine tube routing that you would apply to your body and use your ergonomics in order to wine tasting experience. So your Cabernet Sauvignon would be kind of injected into the tube system in this way. And then you would perform a set of choreographic instances in order to try and run that deciliter of red wine through all of the wire system or the tube system in order to air it well to finally have a sip of it. Coming to the third part in Slovenia, which is relating to a ritual. So quite obvious, the Google Earth database didn't show the portrait of the village with the new building. So we identified back then an opportunity that sooner or later this aerial shot is going to be made, and the new identity of Vitanje has an opportunity to send a message to outer space, but through the imagery also to the rest of the global population. The question was what kind of message is to be sent, and to cut the long story short, the relationship between Herman Potočnik-Nordung, Arthur C. Clarke, who also said Douglas Adams' use of "don't panic" was perhaps the best advice that could be given to humanity, and that's probably also relevant today. We decided that the first message Vitanje should send into space is going to be the "don't panic" title from the notorious fictional book. So we've organized a gathering, a public event, where people came through, and out of biodegradable foil that usually it's kind of made for stacking the hay, we kind of created an area on the nearby meadow of Vitanje with an inscription, "Don't panic." So the students have organized 2 instances, infrastructures, an airplane and a drone to come in and to make a new portrait of Vitanje, which looked like that at the end of the day, at the end of the ritual. This was also part of the final presentation, and the new portrait, which was then uploaded, and it's still there on the user side, uploaded data on the Google Earth. So with this, we created an opportunity that Vitanje has gotten with this new identity, that it could be a recurrent ritual that can, in a way, from year to year, implement and change the message that is being sent to the population and beyond. Funnily, we kind of started to zoom around, and we found a set of local kids who had their birthday party the same day, and they kind of hacked into the project, and they sent their own names written down on their yard into the space. Okay, so change of location. We are going to France, in Ault, that's Picardy. Ault is a town. It's a town that overlooks the English Channel and hangs on the cliffs, and it is in a constant identity crisis. Throughout the history, the cliffs were eroding and the city was disappearing. So it possesses this amazing occasional public space which comes out during the tide variations, and it also possesses this identity crisis with disappearing town. So let's speak about Postcard. So Ault, it has very strong relationship with the cliffs, although those cliffs are untouchable. They are dangerous for your life. But at the same time, Aultians, as users, as people, as inhabitants, as we were running interviews, they all identify themselves with the cliffs very strongly, with their own personal relationships to the cliffs, although the cliffs are kind of making them disappear. So this relationship between a person, an inhabitant, and the cliff, it's emotionally strong, but physically impossible. So we've kind of used this opportunity to understand how the public space works, and we brought in mirrors as kind of a tools, objects, art objects, and asked all of the interviewed inhabitants that we were collaborating with from Ault to carry the mirrors in their hands, and for once to reverse the story, so the cliff is not supporting the people from Ault, but Ault are actually holding and supporting the cliff itself in their hands. So in a way, we kind of created this haptical, magical moment of how Aultians kind of hold the cliff, that it's part of their identity. So we created this kind of set of photographs that were in next steps turned into a postcards that were, of course, put into the tabak, but at the same time also given back to all the people who have been collaborating with the student group. Just to realize that we have not just created a postcard, but we have created a representation of their emotional relationship with the cliff. And you can imagine the emotional power when we were kind of bringing those things together. Lastly, this is the chief of a small tourist organization in Ault, who has now the tool in hand in order to cater you when you're coming to visit Ault, to produce your own custom-made postcard from the local resource. So moving to Honolulu in 2018, it is extremely urban environment, and we were working in Kaka'ako, which is an industrial district on the verge of gentrification. So not a very traditional Honolulu, but well, traditional as we know it in the sense of mass tourism, but traditional in the sense that it used to be a very important part of inhabitants' lives, and now it's kind of transforming itself into an urban experience for visitors. Kaka'ako, historically, it was a salt production field. But nowadays, this area only bears the name as a salt block. It has nothing to do with salt production anymore. So we've looked at how salt is being produced locally on Hawaii, and we started to create an urban salt making process. With simple experimentations like this, using the clay as traditional material, and with first experiments really producing some salt in the urban environment, and then run through experiments with society, either those who were owning all of those mini economies over there, around the salt district in Kaka'ako, but also through the visitors. So eventually, the students, as a last prototype, they have produced a urban salt making machine that they've given it to the community of salt urban block, who were able to start producing their own production of salt for their own restaurants and so on. So in a way, they have created a community network of a salt collective. So last year, we went to Moray, Peru, in high Andes. This is an image of a dry period, and here it's a rain period of the same Moray, which is one of the very important archaeological sites in Peru, not very far from Machu Picchu. But next to it, we have a Centro Mil, a restaurant which is run by chef Virgilio Martinez, who also owns Central, a very popular and renowned restaurant Central in Lima. And he's, of course, one of the top 10 chefs in the world, and also featured in Netflix Chef's Table. Meaning that members of global society are coming to experience extreme culinary events in Centro Mil, which is this building here on the edge of Moray. At the same time, Moray is welcoming quite a lot of tourists per day. So how can we redefine a guide? Moray is one of the most frequently visited Inca sites in the Andes, and its historical origin and value have never been archaeologically properly researched nor proven. And now recent government reconstructions of the curved terraces are paying very little attention to archaeology. They're only focusing on form, resulting in extremely superficial understanding of Moray that actually serves only to mass tourism model of visiting. So we've looked at what territorially Moray really means, and what is the area which is kind of designated only to the people who are buying the ticket, and what is the area beyond that, which is community lands. The community plays a very important role also in the restaurant that we were hosted in, the Centro Mil, because it is the Centro Mil as a restaurant is producing the food only coming from locally produced communities. So understanding the community as one of the most important parts of this identity, the students have tried to understand what is the element or the knowledge about Moray through the nowadays contemporary locally community, instead of archaeological research, or instead of just kind of selling the story of shape. So they have run through understanding very interesting individual personal stories with each individual owners or people who are actually working on those fields around, and they kind of collected those stories, written them down in, of course, 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Quechua, in order to kind of create an alternative path to the Moray, which comes out of the restaurant and then trespasses all of those community lands, where specific spots were marked down with, let's say, a very simple landscaping gesture of marking down the circle with sand, where certain specific stories took place. But at the same time, they also created a set of a booklet, a mini publication, which kind of contained all of these stories, where a visitor would also kind of be reading on its own or accompanied by a person who is a member of a local community, so the person who has actually experienced that specific story, to be read and represented as an alternative and contemporary version of the historical site of Moray. So in conclusion, coming back to nanotourism keywords, in reflection of being participatory, educative, and bottom-up, we can reflect on these projects, but I would like also to stress that seeing this, maybe nanotourism is not about scale, but is an ability to construct responsible experiences in a bottom-up process and using local resources. But also, nanotourism is beyond tourism. It's more an attitude to improve specific everyday environments and an opportunity for new local micro economies. And that said, I think it's also important to understand nanotourism as an approach of life and understanding our own environment where we live in. And that's maybe already the cue to Ivana and Oasa. But before I finish, I would just kind of give you also the invitation. This year's we are teaming up with Vienna Design Week, where we are going to look at a ritual, a festival, a design week of Vienna, how this impacts the local inhabitants of Vienna, of the district where the Vienna Design Week is going to be taking place, but the same also the visitors they're coming to see that. So thank you very much, and that would be from my part.